Hello, welcome back to the second part of my first video. In the first part we summarized the contents of chapter 1 from a book called In Search of the Miraculous by P.D. Ouspensky. And in the second part now we will come to the interpretation of chapter 1. So I will share my thoughts, opinions on the topic, and we will do this in a specific way. I will read again through chapter 1, and whenever something interesting pops up in my head, I will stop reading and share it with you. This way I will ensure that my impressions are fresh and I don't need to remember as much. So we will see how this goes and see you in a bit. Just a quick note here. I have to be careful that I'm not focusing too much on video quality and on focusing on that the video is becoming, for example, fluent or pleasant to watch, or the videos can be of let's say shit quality. It is better that I produce videos of low quality than to produce few videos now in the beginning. Let's say after 100 videos I can start to focus on production quality. But for now, production quality shall not be important for me. So I just got to the point where the author, P.D. Ouspensky, shared his introduction on why he started on his path, and it was because of the contradictions, and he suspected contradictions in everything in the world, and he suspected that there is something beyond those contradictions, a truth beyond, which he calls the miraculous, and that he set out to search for. So compared to me, I'm on the search for a different reason. I'm on the search because I have the strong feeling I have to know and understand, but not the ordinary things or the normal things, but the higher knowledge, I would call it. So I have to understand consciousness, I have to understand experience, I have to know what time is. I have to know if there is a purpose, if there are higher realities, and such things. Yeah, that's really what interests me, and that's why I'm on the journey, on the search for higher knowledge. Yeah, there are many more topics which now didn't mention, but those are the most important ones. Yeah, another one which actually started me on the journey is the term enlightenment. Well, I had some kind of enlightened experiences, but I also want to know how far you can go towards enlightenment and what it means. Yeah, so let's continue reading and see you in a bit. So now he talked about schools. So schools in the sense of yogic schools or mystery schools, something like that. And he said that before he started his journey to India, he had a very romantic idea about schools, and after he returned he got a more tangible and concrete view on schools. First he mentioned that he had the idea also that that one can be able to make contact with schools beyond the physical boundaries. So by that he means that he thought it would be possible to make contact with schools of ancient Egypt, with masters of ancient Egypt through time. And when I read this, I thought of channeling. Channeling is something where a person says that they can receive the consciousness of another being, and that being can be everyone who ever lived here or in another reality. So some channelers, for example, channel Jesus, or other channelers, you can find them on YouTube, channel the Pleiadians, for example, which is described as a star race from a distant galaxy named the Pleiades. And regardless of whether this is real or not, sometimes it resonates with me. For example, listening to the channelings of those of some people. I believe that there is some truth about it, but that's just my belief. Then he mentioned that he came to the conclusion that partaking in a school is necessary to progress, but he looked at all kinds of different schools, and no school was suitable for he deemed suitable for him. And he noted that schools also require a choice and not just a study. So you have to choose which school you enter, which then excludes to a certain extent the other schools. And I'm certainly not yet at this stage where I want to commit to a certain school. I'm currently at this stage where I want to get an overview for myself to then judge where I will go further. Alright, so now we learned in the book how Ouspensky got in touch with a guy called Georgiev, which I will refer to as G, who will become his teacher. And G has a school, and now it's described how he got his first impressions of the school and what they were, and his impressions about G and how they met. So nothing really interesting. I will come back when we get to know the first kind of knowledge or wisdom from G. So reoccurring through the first chapter is that he describes the personality of G and also some of his antics and behaviors. And so for example, he describes that he charges much money for his student, and he frequently travels and relocates such that students don't have an easy time attending his courses or gaining access to his teachings. And or he said that he got the impression that he deliberately met in crowded areas or in loud environments, noisy environments where it was difficult to follow him. And another example is that he plays different roles and has some contradictions. And so what I mean with plays different roles, for example, one time he found out that the author found out that G besides his role as a teacher, also sometimes does trivial things like being a carpet vendor for a week or so, and such. He does all kind of different things, and the impression or explanation I get from this is that he wants to make it difficult for potential students to gain access to his teachings by testing them. So potential students would have to look behind his play and not get offended by it. And then they can get access. So what I take from this is, when I'm on my journey, I have to be careful who upsets me, no, I just have to expect that if I want to attain higher knowledge, I will also have to undergo some tests which are going to prove my worthiness, let's say. Alright. Now it gets more interesting for me. The author asked G whether he should sometimes return to India for his journey, and G replied that it's not necessary, everything can be found here. And he said that every master or gurus of a school specializes in one particular thing. And then the author asked how G studied, and G said he was fortunate because he was amongst a group of many specialists, each specializing in a different subject, and from time to time they came together and shared their insights. So it's also important for me that I want to get a complete picture, and the question is, how can I get the complete picture? If I were to enter one school, I could become very specialized. Well, I think it's now too early to say more about this. I will just continue for now reading and looking for opportunities that present myself in my life and go from there. Then G said a very interesting thing. The author asked the author asked him where he had gathered his knowledge, so where G had gathered his knowledge, and G didn't give him an explicit answer, but he said that he observed Ouspensky before they met on his, so he heard already about him in the newspapers about the journey of Ouspensky, and he instructed his students to look up the information of what he was currently doing, and from that predict where he will be going. And that was very interesting for me, because it means what you're currently doing and what you're currently doing and what your current intentions are will determine where you will land in the future. So it is important to get your intentions right, your surroundings right, and your actions right. So I want to conclude now, because except for mentioning one important point, but I want to conclude now mainly because the author continuously says that she said something but didn't understand it at the time, so I would rather now then continue with the second chapter and maybe see if he understands then. That's why I want to conclude now. But there is one very interesting point was mentioned in this chapter, and that was that G was referring to humans, to man, as machines, as automata. So they don't actually do anything, but they act on impulses. Just like I mentioned in part 1, where it starts to rain because of temperature change, it just happens, and in the same way everything just happens to man. But so I already covered in the first part, but just for the ones who didn't see it, the first part. But now, when I first read this, I meditated on that, I contemplated that quite intensely. So I really tried to see that this is true. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt and tried to see if that's true, and how my experience would change if I believed that I'm indeed everything happens to me. So that implied that my body, my thoughts, my actions are not belonging to me, but are just appearing in experience. and I don't even say my experience, because who am I for whom this experience arises? So let's say there's just experience of, I'm speaking now of my experience. I have to say my, because if I only say speak of experience, you don't know what I mean. So I have to say my experience, even though I don't mean my experience, I just mean experience. So I mean, I all the time have to say I, but just think that with I don't mean this person sitting here in front of the microphone. I mean somebody else who I don't know yet, which is also part of the journey of my my journey to find out who am I. Yeah, so this statement that we are machines really got me thinking and contemplating this. I noticed after 20 minutes or so, my experience quite noticeably changed. And how did it change? Yeah, exactly in this way. It changed that I began to act more automatically. So not having the impression that I am in control of my actions and I am choosing deliberately my actions. And what I really want to know is if this impression that we have of deliberately choosing our actions and thinking that we are in control of what we say or do, whether this impression is just that, an impression, so it would mean it's not real, and in fact really everything happens automatically, like rain falling from the cloud. But what my impression from the book so far is that there are two, I mean, my understanding of the world in general now, that there are basically two systems going in different directions, and the first system is what we also call the left-hand path, which involves occultism and such. This aims at achieving more control or going more in the direction of having the impression that you are in control, or actually really being in control. But what is actually the difference, and how could you know if you're not under an illusion, if you're just under an illusion, or if it's really so? But also, what does it matter to you? That's what would interest me. So this would be the left-hand path, and the right-hand path would be going in this other direction, seeing actually that we are not our body, we are not our thoughts, alone. Let's say we are everything. So we are our body, thoughts, experience, and the one who observes it also, and to whom it presents itself. Going along this path is what I think of as the path to enlightenment, where we would have Eckhart Tolle and the well-known like Jesus, Buddha, whereas on the left-hand path we have the mystery schools, hermetic schools. I would assume that organizations like the Freemasons would follow this path, or the occult schools which perform rituals. I would assume those are following the left-hand path. So that's currently my world view, my impression which I have on the main separation between the two spiritual directions one can take. But I honestly have a bit the impression that the left-hand path would be more on the dark side, on the evil side. That's why I would naturally gravitate more towards the right-hand path, because with that one I associate the more benign, the more friendly, loving, caring way. To some extent, let's say, I followed both paths already and got my first impressions for both of them. And let's just put it this way. With the left-hand path, I had intense struggle most of the time, interspersed with brief moments of victory. And with the right-hand path on the other hand, I had mainly beautiful experiences and liberating experiences. So that doesn't mean I want to exclude now the left-hand path, because I want to stay open to everything until I get a complete picture of everything. So until I feel I'm now ready to decide. Alright, that's it for this video, and in the next one we will go through chapter 2 of the book, and next one will only be one part. I will try to make it shorter, put more emphasis on the important parts, and do the summary and the interpretation in one. So we'll basically make just a video as we did now, because I think it's much better to have it together, because as you have seen, I had to revisit the content anyway for those who would only see the second part, so it makes no sense to split it up in 2 parts. Yeah, so that's the outlook for the next video. Alright, so see you, bye.